When I met Grace, she was 15 years old. She'd been raised in a home where her mother was critical and controlling, and her father mostly just absent emotionally. Nobody would identify her home as abusive or even bad. Far from it. She was fed and clothed. She got good grades in school. She stayed out of trouble. She cleaned her room, even. What could be better than that? Well, turns out a lot. Despite being cared for, Grace never received unconditional love. And she responded to her pain with anger, defiance, and lying, among other behaviors. Any of this sound familiar? Her behaviors? I'm Greg Bear, and if you're searching for help to avoid this common trap, click the like, subscribe, and bell buttons. I'm committed to providing you with thorough and effective parenting education. Now, back to Grace. Her mother, Carla, began studying the parenting training. She also worked with a parenting coach who loved her and taught her, much as Carla, in turn, would love and teach her children. The beginning of the process was difficult because Carla had suffered with her own wounds for 42 years, and Grace had suffered with similar wounds for 15 years. That's a lot of old pain to carry around. But Carla, the mother, persisted through the initial resistance and tantrums of her children, in this case, Grace. She learned to love Grace, and Grace began to feel the love. Carla taught her daughter how to tell the truth, how to be responsible, how to study in school, and how to be loving to her siblings and others. When the time arrived for Grace to go to college, she was prepared to go. No small thing. Grace had just begun her first semester at college when she texted me that she was feeling overwhelmed. We met on a video call. Grace said, "I've talked to my mom, but it's not helping." And I said, "Sometimes you just need somebody who's really old. So what's overwhelming you?" And Grace said that in one of her classes, she was learning the bones of the body, and it was just too much for her. I tried to help her with the class, but that wasn't lifting her spirits. I expressed understanding and compassion. Still nothing. She was still frustrated and just down, and annoyed and aggravated and frustrated. Grace's panic was getting worse. She said out loud, "Why is this happening? I'm doing all the right things, but nothing is working." And I said, "This could seem complicated or mysterious, but it's not. And it might seem like I'm about to change the subject, but I'm not. You were badly wounded as a child, kid. Way worse than you think. That doesn't mean that you are flawed. It means that even though you've been loved by your mother and myself in the past several years, you're still wounded and still need some healing." How were you wounded? Thousands of times. Several times every day, your dad told you that you were worthless. Thousands of times. Did he come right out and say that you were worthless? No, it was more subtle than that. Mostly, he simply didn't pay attention to you. He cared only about himself, his comfort, his way. He didn't find you, sit with you, and show you with his words or behavior that you mattered to him. And you saw that every day that you didn't matter. When your feelings were hurt by him, by your brother, by life, he just didn't care. He didn't even notice you were relatively worthless to him. Grace said, "I don't think about that much, but yeah, you're right." So I said, "How many times do you think a little girl can hear you don't matter before she believes that she really isn't worthwhile?" Not many times. And you heard that from him many times a day. You were squashed like a bug, emotionally speaking. And that's why sometimes now you think, what is wrong with me? Of course you would think that. You were told that there was something wrong with you. And Grace said, "I think I get it. But Mama loved me." Yes. 3 years ago, she began to love you, but prior to that, she also wounded you thousands of times. First, she had no idea how to be warm with you. Kids need cuddling and tenderness. She didn't know how to do that. And it hurt you. Just the absence of the warmth and cuddling. And yeah, she's learned a lot about warmth in recent years, but the wounds were still inflicted before that. Second, she controlled you. She told you what to do and corrected you far more than you needed. She sometimes did the teaching in excess of the loving. And Grace said, but she did love me. Yes, in recent years she did, but the wounds she inflicted on you happened in your younger years, in the years when young brains are forming pathways that tend to last a lifetime. You learned that the world was a harsh and unloving place, so you learned to be afraid and to protect yourself. Those wounds will heal with love and time, and you'll form new pathways, but it doesn't happen quickly. All your wounds are not obviously lying on the surface, but they're still there. So that when some particular single wound occurs in the present, you feel not only that wound, but also the weight and pain of so many wounds of the past. What's especially confusing is that you're unaware of 99.9% of those past wounds. So your overreaction in the present, like lately, seems baffling. But it's not a mystery. Each time something goes wrong in the present, you feel the pain of thousands of wounds. Not kidding. And this is why you wonder what's wrong with you when only a little thing is happening now, like it is right now. And Grace said, that's a lot to digest. Yeah, you're a poster child for PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder, which is a form of PTSD. Here's a short version of how PTSD and PCSD work. Something happens in the present that connects us immediately, involuntarily, to the pain from lots of past wounds. In other words, the present events trigger the pain of the past. Present triggers might include, among many possibilities, a person who doesn't care about you, reminding you of parents who ignored you or controlled you, or a school class where you briefly feel confused or behind, like you're feeling right now with some of your classes, which brings back all the confusion and pain of the past. You might be triggered by feeling trapped, which is how you felt as a child, when you had nowhere to go with your pain, and the trigger would be feeling trapped by not understanding even a particular concept in an individual class now at school. Grace said, sounds kind of hopeless. Well, yes and no. You cannot control the initial moment of pain, the trigger. And we all react to some degree to inconvenience and pain. What you can control is what you choose to do next after you recognize your initial pain and reaction. On the one hand, you could choose to wallow in the pain and cry or complain. Lots of people do that. You could choose to wonder what's wrong with you. You could blame the person who was thoughtless and inconvenienced you, or blame the class that is inconvenient. You could spiral into worthlessness. You could be angry and control people. Lots of potential reactions, but none of that ever works. Grace said, I don't want to choose to do any of that, so what can I do? Well, you could remember that your mom loves you, letting go of the times that she hasn't. You could remember that I love you. You could remember the many times your mom has held you, kissed you, listened to you. You could remember the hundreds of times I've talked to you, emailed you, texted you, and spoken to you by video. Remember that God loves you, gives you breath, and makes it possible for you to be happy. And Grace said, after a pause, that's a lot of powerful stuff to remember. I could do that. You've healed a lot, kid. Now you can recognize that old wounds are affecting you every time something unpleasant happens in the present, like a difficulty in a class, feeling trapped by ignorance of a concept. Keep focusing on the good stuff I just talked about. Not just good stuff, but true and good stuff. So let's be specific about why you got overwhelmed by anatomy class. It's not about a single test or subject or concept. It's that a moment of confusion in anatomy triggered the mountain of confusion and pain you've known as a child. It's the mountain of the past that makes you feel overwhelmed, not a failure to understand a particular thing now, or feeling like a failure because you didn't do well on a test. As I continue to talk with Grace and love her, the pain and fear of the past lessened, even resolved during that conversation. Without that distraction, she became unafraid in the present and easily completed the anatomy assignment that had previously overwhelmed her. Because the confusion and pain of the present was gone, the combination of the present and the past became bearable. If your child is having any of the behavior problems common to childhood, it is a certainty that they're suffering from the PTSD I just described. And you can learn how to love and teach your child by studying the parenting training at realloveparents.com. The earlier you begin to love and teach them, the sooner you can begin to heal their wounds and rewire the neural pathways that have been laid down under the influence of pain and fear. You're saving their lives.